Hey you guys, Filemaker Security. Now there have been a lot of people who've asked me questions about this, and I don't think I've ever really made a video about it, so there were a few things that I kind of wanted to show to you guys that are maybe kind of important. Let's say that you have a Filemaker file, and I've got a very simple, very basic example here where you have some employees with some information, and as you can see already there is like an hourly wage in there for every employee. This could be a problem. You have some jobs with job information, and you have maybe some financial data in your file. Now maybe you've got a bunch of different types of people all using this file. You need to enter all your employee information in there because you just need to have that. But you also maybe put information about certain jobs in there that your employees maybe need to access. But you don't want your employees to kind of see the hourly wage of the other employees. And you don't want the employees to be able to see your financial data of your firm. So you want to put up some restrictions. So let's see how we could kind of go and do those kinds of things. So if you go, first of all, my file starts here in a menu. But if you would close your file in another, when you're on another layout, I think if you would open it like this, oops, that's the wrong one. Then you will end up again, it will open up again on the layout that you were when you closed it. So if you want to make sure that everybody always arrives in this menu, you have to go to File, File Options, and then you have to switch to Layout, and you have to choose this menu that you've created. That way, anyone who opens the file, no matter where they closed it, will always open up on this menu. And that's, I think, the first step to really securing your file, making sure that everybody starts out on the same layout. Because otherwise, if people are showing up on all kinds of different layouts, you have no control over what they can and cannot see. This central area, I think, this menu, I think is essential. Of course, people can always still kind of go and change the layout here, but normally speaking, people are going to be using this stuff to move around. Okay, so let's go to File, Manage Security, and actually I think if you go back to File Options for just a second, there is also here login using an account and a password. Maybe some people have tried to mess around with this to create like a login, and maybe that has or has not worked. Probably not. Before you can log in using a certain account and a password, you do need to create those accounts and passwords, and all of those settings can be found under File, Manage Security. Now, I have to warn you, this is actually a very dangerous place to go messing around, because if you create an administrator account and then you forget the password to it or something like that, you will not be able to access your file anymore, or you might not be able to have any more full access to your file, and then you can't change layouts or even get into layout mode. You can't change scripts anymore. You can lose access even to this whole area. So this is really like a dangerous place to go messing around. So you really need to make sure that there is always a full access account, and that you definitely have the login information to that account. Maybe even make a backup account or something like that. Just make sure that you can always get in your file with full access. Okay, if you have ever been here and you've tried to make an account, you may have been so smart as to click New, and then you could have said, I want to have an account name for Joe, and then maybe I'll just give Joe a password, Joe, that's very weak of course, but it doesn't matter, it's easy for us right now. What you can do for your users is you can set up a password for them, and tell them what the password is, but then you can require them to change that password when they sign in. So they will sign in with the account name that you gave them. They will use the password that you gave them, but then they will have to enter that old password and basically enter a new password that they make up themselves. So then you will not know what their password is, and that will be kind of safe. In some places that's kind of wanted that only the user knows their own password. You can set, you don't have to do that now, we'll just keep it with Joe. You can set an account as active or inactive. If some employee who has access to your database gets fired, you can set him to inactive, or just basically delete their account. And that's of course a thing to keep in mind. when you make accounts, because now I'm making one for Joe, but you can also make one for employees, and then you could just give that employees login to all the employees. But that's not a smart idea, because if one of your employees gets fired, they will still have access to the database. You will have to change the password, and then you will have to tell all of the other employees who are still working for you, who normally are not affected by this firing of this one employee, that they all now have to use a different password, and that's annoying. So it's best to just make a separate account for every single person. And then what you can see here is that you can place this person into a privilege set. Now, people who have been just kind of messing around with this probably gave up at this point and said, what is this privilege set? I don't understand what this is. This is too difficult. I'm going to just cancel and get out of here because I'm starting to get a little bit of a headache. Okay, so the privilege set is in the next tab here, and there are a few different kind of privilege sets that FileMaker kind of offers you by default. So you can see that for every user there is an account name, but also a privilege set. So for every privilege set, there are users that are in that privilege set. So by default, FileMaker makes you an admin account, and it doesn't have a password, and that is in the full access privilege set. So the privilege set full access basically has access to everything. Now you also have a few other privilege sets, like a data entry only, which has write access to all records, but it has no design access, and you have a read only access. So read access to all records, no design access, write access to all global fields. Okay, so these are a few different settings. Now, if you want to make any kinds of changes to these, you probably won't be able to do so because everything is grayed out. So what you need to do is you can always create a new one, or I think you can even duplicate. You can't apparently duplicate this one, but you can duplicate other ones. You can duplicate and then you can start changing them. So if you would like to make one for your employees, you could duplicate this one, and you can give it a name, so employees. And then you could say, you can have a description in there if you want. Now, there are a whole lot of different settings in here, and a few very important ones that are in here are, for instance, if you're hosting your FileMaker file and you want your users to have access to it, you have to allow access via the FileMaker network, FMAPP. So this is kind of important if people are going to log in using, like for instance, WebDirect, you need to check this one. If you want to do this kind of stuff, you need to check these boxes. So here you can determine how a privilege set is allowed to access this database. So this is a very important one for when you're hosting your file. And then, well, this one is basically to re-authenticate if someone's been logged on for a certain amount of time. Okay, so the important stuff in here, so you've got a few options that you've got here. Disconnect from the server when idle, allow users to modify their own password. You can have some more settings for this stuff. Available menu commands, those are kinds of things that come in handy when you have, for instance, the ability to use this FileMaker app on an iPad or an iPhone, and you want to be able to take pictures with it directly into the database. These kinds of menu commands are affected by this. So if you have this on editing only or minimum, people might not be able to do certain things, might not be able to have access to certain functions. So this is a good one to keep in mind. Most of the important stuff, however, is in here. Now, I'm just gonna save this for now so that we can go back to our database. And you know what, let's make an account here. We have our admin, that's me, and I'll just make a new one for my employee named Joe. I already started with that before, but let's finish it. I'll just give him the password Joe just to keep it easy, and then I'm going to say that he does not need to change this password. His account is active, and I'm going to assign him to the privilege set of employees. Okay, cool. So I've got a new user. Every time I go out of this area, I click OK. First of all, FileMaker is going to give me kind of a nagging message. One or more of the accounts that have full access privileges do not have passwords. This is a security risk. Do you want to allow this? Well, that is my admin account that has been created by default by FileMaker, and it indeed does not have a password. Normally I would not like this, but for the purposes of this exercise I'll just allow it, and then I can just do admin without a password, and that's fine. You always have to give up a full access login and password to make changes in that whole security setting area. Okay, so let's see, what do we want to do in our security? What do we want to restrict for our users? So we have our employees, and like I said before, we have our hourly wage. Now I've got my guy Bruce, I've got my guy Joe, they all have hourly wages, but I don't really want those employees to see those, because what's going to happen is one employee is going to see that someone else has a lower hourly wage than them, and then they're going to say, oh, but this guy works very hard, he should get a raise, and the boss doesn't really want all of that nagging. So let's restrict access to this field. Now we can very easily do that by going to File, Manage Security, and then we go into the privilege set of the employees, and then we go and look at all of these settings that we have here. So this is about the data access and design to records, layouts, value lists, and scripts. So for scripts, for instance, it's kind of an easy one. They could either be all modifiable, all executable only, or all no access. Now I do want my users to be able to execute scripts, but I don't want my users, like my employees, going into my FileMaker database and messing around with the scripts that I made. So this would be a very good setting so that the users don't accidentally, even just to protect your users, so that they don't accidentally go into your scripts and change stuff around. Or even if they deliberately do that to sabotage your database. You don't want that. So you can really lock your users out of your scripts like this. Okay, let's look at records. We can create, we can edit, and we can delete in all tables. Is that a good idea? Well, let's have a look. What else can we do? We can create and edit on all tables, but not delete. Okay, we can view only in all tables, or we can have no access to all. That seems a bit drastic, but there's another option here, custom privileges. Let's have a look at what we find under here. So I've got my tables here. I've got an employee table, I've got a jobs table, and I've got a menu table. And then I've got all these different options here. Can I view this table? Apparently I can. Can I edit this? Yes. Can I create records in here? Sure. Can I delete them? Yes. Or what kind of field access do I have? I have access to all fields. Now this is already a good hint, because in our employee table I would like to restrict access to that hourly wage field. And I can go into field access and I can say all, limited, or none. And when I go into limited, I get these 3 dots, so that tells me that there must be more options behind this. And so you can see that you can really dive in pretty deep and do some stuff here. So now I get all of the fields in my employees table, and for every field I can suggest whether that field needs to be modifiable, view only, or no access. And so my hourly wage, I want my employees to have no access to that field. So very simple, I just select that field, set it to no access, and now my employees cannot see the hourly wage. They can't see their own, or they can't see others. Okay, now you can see in employees that I've changed this a bit to limited. Now there's another thing that I can change here. For instance, if my employees get into my file and they get into the employee data, do I want them to be able to create new employees? I actually don't want that, because I'll be creating the employees and they do not. And if they maybe are having a fight with another employee, they might want to delete this employee's data. I don't want that, so I'm gonna have them not have access to deleting employees. I don't want any other employees deleting employees. I don't want them creating them, or I don't want them deleting them. Actually, I might not even want them to edit information. On the other side, if they change their address, they could just go in there and change their address. If they move, for instance, they need to update their address, and so maybe that's fine. I'll just trust them with that. Okay, so now I can set this to OK. I can OK this, and again I will have to allow this admin without password, admin, and now I have to give in that full access login so that these changes can be saved. Now, the thing that you have here is, I actually don't know if this is working now or not. The only way to find out is if I close my file and then I open my file again, and then I actually don't have a login here, so I have to go to File, File Options, and I cannot automatically log in with this information, because then everybody's just going to log in as the admin. So I have to uncheck this box. Okay, so let's try that again. Let's close, let's File, Open Recent. And then I've got this open security dialog where I have to log in with my login credentials. So I'm going to log in as Joe this time, and I'm going to sign in. And then when I go to employees, I can see that there is a question mark here. So I've got Joe has been logged in, and I cannot see, or Joe cannot see, the hourly wage for anyone, not for himself or not for others. So that's one way that you can kind of go about to restrict access to a certain field, just so to make sure that employees do not see the value in a certain field. Okay, so that's a good one. Now let's try some other stuff. If I want to go to my script workspace, I do not have access to it, so I can't go and change and create scripts. So that's a good one as well. So Joe has been locked out of that as well. But for me, it's kind of annoying because now I have to close my file again. I have to open it again. I have to put in my admin password. Okay, this is kind of annoying, and when you're working with these user settings, you always have to kind of log in and log out, and that's kind of annoying. But what you can do is you can make a little script that can help you with that. So let's make a new script, and let's call this re-login Joe. And there is a script step for this, which is called re-login. And you can have the dial. I'll just turn the dialog off, and I'll just provide my information here, Joe. Okay, and that way, if I run this script, I can very easily re-log into my database as that user. Now I'm going to save this one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate, because I would also like to make one where I can re-log in back as admin. Now, of course, this is very dangerous to leave this script in, because that means that if Joe logs in and he runs this script, he can just log in as admin and have access to everything. So you cannot leave this script in there, but you can use it for testing. Okay, so admin, and this one can be empty. Okay, so this is my re-login for admin. Let's save that. And then what I can do is I can go to the employees table, and I can see now I'm seeing all of the information. But if I re-log in as Joe, then I'm not seeing this information. And then when I re-log in as admin, then I am seeing this information again. So this is a very handy way to switch between different accounts to be able to see what a certain user can and cannot see. Okay, let's try something else. Let's say we have a bunch of financial data. And let's say that this is a button that has a button setup that has a single step, and that goes to a layout. Go to layout, and let's say that it goes to a whichever, it doesn't really matter. Let's say lay jobs. Okay, cool. So in this financial data, I don't want anyone who's an employee to have access to this stuff. So what I could do is I could go back to File, Manage Security, and then I could go into my privilege set for the employees, because if I remember that there is a layouts option here, and I could say do custom privilege, and let's say that my lay jobs, actually that's a bad idea, because I've based my financial data on the layout jobs, but I do want to have my employees to have access to this layout of jobs when they are, well, okay, maybe they are separated here. So you get jobs and layout jobs. Oh no, no, okay, I did it wrong. Okay, let's go back for a second. Let's say that we've got a table with financial data, which doesn't really make any sense, but I'll just do it like this anyway, quickly, because I just want to show you an example. Let's change this one here. Let's do button setup, go to layout, I don't have a layout for this yet. Oh man, I should have thought this through beforehand. Financial data, let's do ID, number, and serial number. Okay, cool, that will create a, financial data layout for me. Okay, so let's say that this one is a button setup, go to layout, financial data. Okay, now I've got a definitely like a separate layout. This button will bring me to a totally separate area of my database. Let's go to manage security and let's do this thing again. Let's go to privilege sets for my employees and let's say that my employee cannot have access to my layout of financial data. I will say for the layout there is no access, and then that means that also my records apparently are gonna kind of grayed out. Okay, so I will have no access. If I do that, I gotta allow this and do my admin thing. Okay, so now if I re-log in as Joe, and let's say that I'm gonna be in the menu. If I re-log in as Joe, I will be able to click here, but then it says no access, which is kind of good because that way Joe cannot get access to this layout. But the annoying thing here is Joe is now stuck. He cannot go anywhere, and the only way that he can kind of go away is by going like this, but I don't really want Joe using this. Because if Joe figures this out, he finds out that he can actually go anywhere he wants. What I want to do is, I want to prevent Joe from going to this layout, and I just want to make sure that he doesn't arrive there. Now you can use this as some sort of a backup, so that if he just manages to get to that layout, he still can't see anything that's on it. But what I would like to do is I would like to prevent him from going there from the moment he clicks on this button, so that he never even leaves this layout. Now, Joe is not able to change the layout, so I have to re-log in as admin. Cool. Now I can change this layout, and we can see the button that we have here. This button does a simple single step, and it goes to a layout. I'm going to need a little bit more than that, so I'm going to have to make a little script, and then I will have to run that script when I click this button. Okay, let's make a new script, and this script is going to be go to financial data layout. Okay, so that's very clear what this one does. So it simply does the same thing, go to layout, and it goes to that layout of the financial data. But before I go there, I do want to do some checks. So let's add an if statement, and let's put this one on the bottom of my script. And the if statement is going to check what privilege set my user has, and if this one is an employee, I want this script to stop before it goes to the layout. So I'm actually going to go into this fx here so that I get a little bit more help. I'm going to say get privilege set. So I could say current privilege set name, that returns the name of the privilege set being used to evaluate this calculation in the file. So okay, if get current privilege set name is equal to employee, then I want my script to beep and to maybe even show a custom dialog which says, hey, what are you doing? You can't go there. All right, there, really rub it in their face. And then you do a halt script, so that if your employee tries to go in there, he's not going to be able to. Okay, let's save this, and then let's attach this script to this button. So, whoops, I was apparently not in layout mode. Let's go back into my menu. Let's button setup, and then, oops, instead of a single step, I want to perform a script, which is go to financial data layout. Okay, cool. So let's try this out. I'm logged in as admin, so I can go there, no problem. Whoops. But if my user, so let's log back in as Joe. If Joe tries this, he gets no access. Now, okay, something has gone wrong here. because this did go through, which was not supposed to go through. Okay, let's relog in as admin and let's find out where the mistake is been made. Okay, what we can do is in my script it says if get current privilege set name is employee. Maybe I made a typo, so let's try and see if employees is with an S. Okay, so there is a mistake right there. Employees is with an S. Okay, let's try to save this. Let's try to relog in as Joe and let's try this again. Okay, so then now the message shows up. What are you doing? You can't go there. Okay, sorry. And so he stays here, so he's not allowed to go there. So that is a better way, I think, to intercept a user before he gets onto a layout. So now he could still kind of go in here and try to get into the... Actually, he can't now. He doesn't have access to that one. So that's probably a good way to use both of those techniques to prevent him from getting onto that layout, because then he'll get stuck, but also to make sure he can get into the layout this way. Okay, cool. So let's run this again, and now I can see this layout when I'm the admin. Okay, so that was another little technique that you can use, where you can use the privilege set name in order to kind of control where a certain user is allowed to go and is not allowed to go. Okay, let's try something else here. Let's say that we have a job, and let's say that every job is assigned to a certain employee, and we don't want employees to have access to other employees' jobs because they'll get distracted or they'll go and mess around and ruin stuff or whatnot. You just don't want them to have access. Okay, how could we go about doing this? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to assign a job to a certain employee. So in order to do that, we go to File, Manage Database, and to our jobs, we're going to add an employee IDFK, which is a number field. And then in our relationship, we're going to have to relate our employee to this employee IDFK field. And I'm actually going to put the jobs here and the employees there because that makes a bit more sense. And then we're going to be linking those together. And then on this jobs layout, I'm going to add this field, this newly created field from jobs, which is employee IDFK, or I can just rename this to employee. There you go. And this needs to be a drop down where I can select an employee. So let's make this a drop down list. Shall I make it a pop-up menu maybe? Let's go here. Let's do employees. And then let's use values from the field of the table employees. I'm going to put their ID in there, but I would like to also see their full name. I'm going to show values from the second field only. So there is a bunch of OKs I need to press. And let's try this out. Let's see what this gives. I got Bruce Wayne, and when I select Bruce Wayne shows up. That's good. But when I look into my actual field of employee IDFK, oops, let's put it here. Then what do I see? My employee's ID is being filled in, which is exactly what I want. That's great. Okay, cool. So this works very well. I can now create multiple jobs. For instance, hotel site. Okay, for instance. And this is for employee Joe. So now I've got two different jobs, and each job is assigned to a different employee. Now I could kind of restrict access to the jobs that are not from a certain employee. But in order to do that, I'm going to need to add one more step, because what I have right now is I do have employees. I've got Bruce and I've got Joe, and I have to match those up with the usernames in my file. So I've got File, Manage Security. I've got usernames here, and I've got Joe, and I could also add Bruce as a user. And I can give him a password, Bruce. Bruce, that's of course not the best password, but okay, he's active and he's an employee. Okay, so now I've got Joe and I've got Bruce, and they just happen to have the same account login name as their first name, but that might not always be the case. If you have multiple Joes or multiple Bruces, you might end up having different account names. So what you need to do first is create a new field for your employees where you enter their username. Now you might not want to put that field on the actual actual user layout that other users are going to be using as well, because then that would again be another field that you have to hide. But what I always do is I have my layout for the employees, but I also have my original employees table that I always put in table view, where I can see all of my data. And there, what I can do is I could just file manage database, add another field where I could say login name, which could be a text field, and then I'm going to add this to this layout. There you go. And so kind of behind the scenes, this will show up, and I can then enter Bruce and I can enter Joe. And so this data does exist in the database, but when your user goes to employees, on this layout, that field does not show up. So those people can't see their own usernames or the usernames of other people. Now, if you want, you can again, of course, go into security and then employees, and then go to this custom privileges where you want to have limited access to certain fields, and the login name needs to be no access for everyone. Okay, so that's one thing that's kind of good. Actually, I don't know if this is going to work now with the thing I'm going to do next, but let's try it out and let's see what happens. Okay, so my job is assigned to Joe, and this other job is assigned to Bruce. When Bruce logs in, I want Bruce to only be able to see Bruce jobs and Joe to be able to see Joe jobs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do file. Okay, and so before we do this, there is something you need to learn. Let's do this on the menu. Let's make a new field for the menu where we say username, and let's make that a calculation. So what you can do is you can get the current user's name exactly as you can get the name of the privilege set by using get current user. Is it user? Just username then. Okay, returns the name of the FileMaker user as specified in the general tab of the preferences. Okay, so that's a good one. Let's try that out. This is going to result in a text, and let's see what happens if we place this on our menu just to test. Then we can see that this gives me nothing because I've got no records here. Let's make a new record, and this tells me Joss, which is weird because I have no user named Joss. So why is this telling me Joss? Now there is a difference between a username and an account name. If you go into File Preferences, under General, it tells me Joss, because that's the name that I'm always using in my other FileMaker files. And this is the name that you can also adjust in your settings, which is pretty handy, where you can enter your own username, so you don't always have to re-enter it. But that's the difference between the username, which is also set here in the settings, and the difference between your account name, which is for me in this case it is admin. So you have to pay attention to that, and we can test this by making a G account name calculation. Let's create that one, and let's do get account name, which needs to result in a text. And if I do that and I place that field on my layout, I will see that there is a difference between username and account name, so you have to be very careful with that. But now that we have in our field of employees, now that we have this login account name, I should probably say account name. Now that we have this here, we can relate this to the current account that is logged in. So we can go into File, Manage Security, into our privilege set. We can go into our employees privilege set, and we can go here into the records stuff and give custom privileges. So for jobs, I want my field access, or I want it to be the view to be specified so that a job can only be viewed by a user who is assigned to that job. So let's say that we want this to be limited. And then we get a specify calculation dialog where we can kind of provide a calculation for when a user should be allowed or not allowed to see a record. Now there's an explanation that here that says calculation results must be Boolean. Boolean means that there can only be two values, true or false. Non-zero values are true, access is allowed. Zero and empty values are false, access is denied. So I want my access to be allowed when the user that is logged in, so get account name, when that account name is equal to my employee's account name. So that's very simple, right? Now I don't know if this is sufficient, so let's try and click OK to see if this works. Let's allow and do admin. Okay, let's try this out. When I go to jobs, and I will have to re-log in as Joe. Joe can get access to Joe Smith, his job, but not to Bruce's job. He just gets no access here. So that's kind of good. And that's a good way to make sure that your user doesn't see records that are not for them. Now what you could also do is again do the same trick as you did here. You can actually have to re-log in back as admin. What you can do is when your employee who is logged in goes to jobs, you can already at that moment perform a find so that that user can only finds all the jobs that are assigned to him. And that's very simple. We'll just make a script where we do that. Go to jobs layout, and we do a very simple find. We do go to layout, and we go to the jobs layout, and then we do a simple find, enter find mode, where we set the pause off. Then we do set field, and every job is going to be related to an employee. So we can, if we arrive in the job site, we can also search on a account name field in the employee table. So we're going to set as a field the get account name, because we're going to search for the current account. We're going to do a set error capture just in case something goes wrong, and then we're going to do a perform find. Okay, let's save that and let's try and see what this does. Actually, this is going to be a problem for me now, for the admin, because I'm not going to find any jobs, presumably. Oops, I have not attached this script to this button yet. So let's do button setup first, perform script, go to jobs layout. If I'm going to do this now as the admin, then I don't see anything because there is not a single job assigned to me, the admin, which is always going to stay the same. So I have to already amend this one by saying that if get current privilege set name is equal to employees, I believe, only then do I want to do this whole thing. So I am going to go to the layout, but if I am an employee, I also want to perform this find. If I'm not an employee privilege set, in that privilege set, I don't want to do this whole find. So this is a good way to make sure that the admin goes to that layout and then it's done for him, but the employees, they perform a find as well. Okay, so let's save this and let's go back to my menu and let's go to jobs. Actually, let's show all. Okay, so as the admin, I can see everything. That's kind of cool. But if I re-log in as Joe, then I go to the jobs, then, okay, that field, I don't have access to that field, so I do that. It's going to give me a problem though. Let's re-log in back as Joe. The problem that I'm having now is I'm trying to perform a find on this username field, but what I had done before is I had made the field access limited, so this user doesn't have access to this account name field, which is I'll just do view only. which is going to prevent this user from doing a find in there because he has no access to that field, so that's not going to work. But now I've fixed this, so let's relog in as Joe. This should work now. If I go to jobs, I have found one of two, and it's only the job that Joe is in, and he's not going to be able to see the other jobs. Now, of course, you can always do show all records, and then he can see the other records, but because he has no access to them, they're not really going to be showing anything. So if Joe goes to jobs, he will only see the Joe jobs. Okay, I think that's quite a lot of information, maybe, but I hope this gives you a bit of overview of all the different kinds of techniques and possibilities that you can have to restrict access to certain users, and the stuff that you can do in this whole security area. So file manage, oops, I'm still logged in as Joe, so I can go there. Remember, of course, to take these scripts back out later on if you're done testing, because someone else might run the script and get in there with full access privileges. File manage security. So as you can see, you can make all these and again, very important, make one login per user, so that if a user becomes fired or something, you can just deactivate their account and nobody else is affected by that. And those privilege sets, just have a look in there and see. There is so much stuff that you can get into, but sometimes you could get a little troubled, like I just was, when you have this employees and you have this account name field in there. Sometimes you might not want users to see it, but they might sometimes do need access to it. So it gets a little tricky sometimes, especially if you have like the financial data that I have. If this financial data is based on the jobs information, it might be a little bit difficult to kind of lock to make sure that users can't see it, because they might have to see jobs information, and they just might not be able to, you just might not want them to see the like total values, where it has the total amount of money coming in or going out. So sometimes it gets a little bit tricky, because sometimes information is shared in one single table. So play around with this and experiment a little bit. Use those relogin scripts to kind of see what is happening, and test this stuff out very well before you let this out in the wild. Okay, I hope this was helpful, and I hope it taught you a little something. Ciao. If you guys want to learn a ton more about FileMaker, you can head over to my Udemy page, where I've got a bunch of entire FileMaker courses online. You can follow them, and basically we make entire FileMaker systems from scratch, and I'll take you on the entire process step by step. There is even one that is completely free, so you can just follow that free of charge, and that is a beginner tutorial where we make an entire contacts database. That's a really fun one that you can follow, that can teach you the basics of FileMaker. So head over there by following the links in the description, and I'll see you guys there.